I'm Harper, a 16-year-old girl, and my life turned upside down recently. I moved out of my mom's house and am now staying with my dad. Mom's been begging me to come back, promising she'd change, but I just can't. Why? Her new family, my stepdad Rick and his son Liam, who's my age, has made life unbearable. My parents divorced 7 years ago. Mom started dating Rick 3 years ago, and after a year, he and Liam moved in. 8 months ago, they got married. Living with them has been a nightmare. Rick and Liam avoid me, and I've learned to steer clear of them too. Worse, Mom has drifted away, spending all her time with them. It feels like she doesn't care about me anymore. At first it hurt. I used to split time equally between my parents after their divorce, but 4 years ago Dad got a massive promotion and had to move away for work. His new role paid really well but required long hours and responsibilities. I understood even though I missed seeing him as often. We adjusted custody. I stayed with Mom most of the week and visited Dad on a few weekends. Those visits were precious but exhausting. We kept it up because I wanted to graduate high school before moving in with Dad permanently. Living with Mom became harder though, especially after she remarried. I tried to talk to her about feeling neglected. Each time she reassured me, promising I was her priority. "You're my flesh and blood," she'd say. But recently her words proved to be empty. Here's what pushed me over the edge. Liam had been stealing from me, my makeup, shoes, and even a pair of expensive sneakers Dad had gifted me. At first, I thought I was misplacing things, but when my sneakers went missing, I saw them in a social media post on Liam's girlfriend. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Liam and I attend the same school, so I messaged his girlfriend, even though we're not friends. She admitted Liam had given her a ton of gifts recently. Makeup, shoes, all expensive. She was thrilled but never questioned how he could afford them. I confronted Liam with screenshots of our chat. He denied everything, claiming he'd saved his allowance, but I knew better. Our allowances are identical and nowhere near enough for such gifts. When I brought it up to our parents, the situation took a bizarre turn. Rick defended Liam. He said it was my fault for showing off my dad's gifts, making Liam feel insecure. Apparently, stealing from me and giving my things to his girlfriend was somehow understandable. It was ridiculous. I don't flaunt my stuff, and even if I did, that's no excuse for theft. Mom just sat there silently. When I asked for her support, she told me to handle it myself, claiming it was a sibling issue. I was furious. Liam got off scot-free, Rick's ego was placated, and Mom refused to stand up for me. That night, I decided I'd had enough. I packed my things and sneaked out after everyone went to sleep. A friend and her older sister helped drive me 4 hours to Dad's place. He was shocked to see me at 6 a.m., but he welcomed me in immediately. After I explained everything, he said he'd figure something out so I could stay. He already knew I felt neglected at Mom's, but hearing the full story angered him. For now, my friends are covering for me at school, saying I'm sick with mono. I'm not sure how long that will hold, but my focus isn't on that. It's on what I've learned since arriving at Dad's. He revealed that Mom had been receiving a substantial amount of child support from him, 20% of his income, ever since his promotion. She demanded it, citing the fact that I spent most of my time with her. At first, Dad agreed, thinking it was fair. But now, knowing how she's treated me, he has serious doubts about how that money was spent. From what I've seen, Mom used it to fund her lifestyle. Jewelry, clothes, accessories, even gifts for Rick and Liam. Sure, she bought me the occasional gift, but it was clear where her priorities lay. She'd always claimed she was working hard to support me, but now I realize it was just gaslighting. The betrayal cuts deep. I'm torn between doing what's best for me, staying with Dad, and not wanting to completely sever ties with Mom. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like I'm making the right decision by moving on. The morning after I arrived at Dad's, I woke up to over a dozen missed calls and texts from Mom. She'd realized I wasn't home, and the messages started pouring in. Some were frantic. "Where are you? Are you safe?" Others were full of apologies. "I'm sorry, Harper. Please come home, let's talk." I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. She'd ignored my feelings for years, brushed off every concern I raised, and let her new family treat me like a stranger in my own home. Now she wanted to talk? I couldn't trust her words anymore. Dad could see how upset I was. We talked a lot that morning. He told me he always suspected something was off about how Mom handled the child support. She'd reassured him so many times that the money was being saved for me, for college, or my future in general. But her social media told a different story. Luxury handbags, designer clothes, expensive dinners. He didn't want to believe she'd lie, but after hearing what I'd gone through, he couldn't ignore it anymore. I quote, "We've been too hands off," he admitted. "I thought giving her the money was enough, but I should have been paying closer attention to how things were going with you." Hearing him say that hurt, but also felt validating. For so long, I'd convinced myself it was normal to feel second to Rick and Liam. I thought maybe I was just being dramatic, but now everything was starting to make sense. Dad decided to involve his lawyer. He wanted to change the custody arrangement so I could live with him permanently. He explained that since I was 16, the courts would prioritize my wishes, which made me feel a little more in control of the situation. Still, I had to figure out my next steps carefully, especially school. If I moved in with Dad full-time, I'd have to transfer to a new school. The commute to my old one would be impossible. This was the hardest part for me. My friends had been my anchor through all of this. They were the ones who drove me to Dad's in the middle of the night, who covered for me when I left, who supported me even when I felt like I was being dramatic. Leaving them felt like cutting off the only solid ground I had left. I spent hours texting my best friend Ellie that day. I told her everything, about Liam stealing from me, about Rick defending him, about Mom's silence. Ellie had been there through every step of my life, from kindergarten to now, and she knew how much I'd tried to make things work at home. "You need to do what's best for you," she told me. "It sucks, and I'll miss you like crazy, but you can't keep living like that. You deserve better." Her words stuck with me. She was right. As much as I loved my friends and my life at school, I couldn't let that keep me in a toxic environment. It wasn't just about Liam stealing or Rick's ridiculous defense of him. It was about Mom. She'd chosen them over me time and time again. I couldn't keep pretending I didn't notice. The next few days were a whirlwind. I stayed home with Dad, avoiding calls and texts from Mom. I didn't know how to face her. Dad started the paperwork for the custody change, and I began researching schools near his house. It was overwhelming, but also freeing. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life. Elle and my other friends kept me updated on what was happening back at school. Apparently, Liam's girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, had blocked him on everything after I told her the truth about his gifts. Word had started to spread, and Liam wasn't exactly popular anymore. I didn't feel bad for him. He'd humiliated himself by stealing and lying, and now he was facing the consequences. Meanwhile, Mom kept reaching out. Her messages started shifting from apologies to guilt trips. "Harper, I'm your mother. I've done everything for you. Don't throw our relationship away over a misunderstanding." That one made me laugh bitterly. Misunderstanding? That's what she called years of neglect and betrayal? The longer I stayed away, the clearer everything became. For so long, I'd let myself believe her excuses, that she was trying her best, that I needed to be more understanding. But now I could see the truth. She didn't fight for me because she didn't want to. Rick and Liam were her priorities. It was just a convenient way to get child support from Dad. By the end of the week, I had made my decision. I wasn't going back. Dad and I agreed that he'd wait to tell Mom about the custody change until everything was finalized. He wanted to handle it carefully, knowing it would probably set her off. I braced myself for her reaction, but I also felt relieved. For the first time in years, I felt like I was choosing what was best for me. That night, I messaged Ellie. "I'm going to miss you so much," I wrote. "But I know this is the right thing for me. Thank you for always having my back. You quote, "V got this," she replied. "I'll always be here for you. And with that, I started preparing for the next chapter of my life. A few days later, Dad's lawyer filed the petition to change custody, and the reality of my decision started to sink in. I'd officially be living with Dad, leaving everything I knew behind. It felt surreal. I kept waiting for the panic to hit, but instead, I felt calm. It was the first time in years that I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells at home. The real test came when Mom found out. Dad told me he'd let her know after the paperwork was filed, so she'd hear it directly from him. He didn't want me to be the one dealing with her anger or disappointment. When the call finally happened, I was in my room, trying to distract myself with a book. I could hear bits of their conversation through the door. Mom's voice growing louder, Dad staying calm but firm. "She's my daughter," she shouted. "You can't just take her away from me." "She's 16, Anne," Dad said. "She's old enough to decide where she wants to live, and she's made her decision, dot." There was a long pause after that, and I could feel my stomach tighten. For all her faults, part of me hoped she'd fight for me. Not for the money, but for me. But when Dad hung up the phone and walked into my room, his expression told me everything I needed to know. "She's not contesting it," he said softly. "She just stopped arguing." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. It wasn't exactly a surprise, but it still hurt. I wasn't expecting some grand declaration of love, but I thought maybe she'd try to explain herself to make me feel like I mattered to her. Instead, she'd just let me go. That evening, I went out to the backyard and sat on the porch steps, staring up at the stars. I felt this weird mix of sadness and relief, like I was mourning something I'd already lost a long time ago. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Maybe I'd already cried enough over Mom. Maybe I was just too tired. Dad joined me after a while, handing me a mug of hot chocolate. We sat in silence for a few minutes before he finally spoke. "I know this isn't easy," he said, "but I'm proud of you, Harper. You're standing up for yourself, and that's not something everyone knows how to do. Thanks," I said quietly. "I just wish it didn't have to be like this." "I know," he replied. "But sometimes, doing the right thing for yourself means letting go of the people who don't treat you right, even if they're family." His words stayed with me. I kept thinking about all the times I tried to talk to Mom about how I felt, how neglected I was, how much it hurt that she always chose Rick and Liam over me. She'd always brushed it off or made excuses, but never once had she really listened. And now, when it mattered most, she'd given up without a fight. The next week was a blur of preparations. Dad and I met with my new school to finalize my transfer, and I started catching up on everything I'd missed. It was overwhelming, but the teachers were understanding, and I found myself easing into the new environment faster than I expected. Meanwhile, news of my move spread back at my old school. Ellie and a few other friends FaceTimed me every night, filling me in on all the drama I'd missed. Apparently Liam was still dealing with the fallout from his girlfriend dumping him. She'd blocked him on everything, and when he tried to confront her at school, she'd gone off on him in front of everyone. She told the whole cafeteria that he was stealing your stuff, Ellie said, barely able to contain her laughter. "I wish you could have seen it. He looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him up." I couldn't help but laugh. It was the kind of justice I didn't think I'd get, and while I wasn't one to revel in someone else's misery, it felt good knowing Liam was facing the consequences of his actions. For years, he'd gotten away with everything because Rick and Mom always covered for him. But now he was on his own. As for Rick, Ellie told me he wasn't taking things well either. Apparently, he'd been making passive-aggressive comments about me whenever my name came up, blaming me for ruining their family. It was almost funny how delusional he was. I hadn't ruined anything. They'd done that all on their own. Despite everything, I started to feel lighter. My new school was nice, and I was making friends faster than I thought I would. I missed Ellie and the others, but we stayed in touch, and I knew our friendship could survive the distance. Dad was busy with work most of the time, but when he was home, he was all in, asking about my day, helping me with homework, just being there for me in a way Mom hadn't been in years. For the first time in a long time, I felt happy, settled, like I was finally where I was supposed to be. And while there was still a lot to figure out, my future, my relationship with Mom, or lack thereof, I knew I was on the right path. The next few weeks were a roller coaster of emotions, but for the first time in years, it felt like I was steering my own life. Living with Dad wasn't perfect. His work hours were long, and sometimes I spent evenings alone in the house. But the difference was that I never felt alone. When he came home, even if it was late, he always checked in on me. It wasn't about grand gestures, it was about the small things, like how he'd bring my favorite takeout on Fridays, or sit with me at the table while I did homework, even if he was dead tired. School was getting easier too. At first I'd worried about making new friends, but the people here weren't as intimidating as I'd thought. In fact, they were kind of amazing. One girl, Mia, sat with me at lunch on my first day and introduced me to her friends. They were curious about my sudden transfer and why I left my old school, but they didn't pry. Instead, they made me feel like I belonged. I hadn't felt that way in a long time. Ellie and I stayed in touch too. She sent me updates on everything happening back home, including more drama with Liam. Apparently, he'd become the school's unofficial outcast after his ex-girlfriend's cafeteria meltdown. People started avoiding him, and he barely spoke to anyone anymore. You should have seen his face yesterday, Ellie said during one of our late-night FaceTime calls. Some kid yelled, "Nice sneakers!" at him in the hallway, and everyone cracked up. He looked like he wanted to crawl into a locker and disappear. I laughed, shaking my head. He deserves it, honestly, but I'm kind of glad I'm not there to see it. It would just make things more awkward. Yeah, but it's still satisfying to know he's finally getting what he deserves. She wasn't wrong. It was satisfying, but I didn't dwell on it too much. Liam was a symptom of a bigger problem, one I'd left behind when I moved out. My focus now was on building a better life for myself, and that meant leaving all that toxicity in the past. Mom, on the other hand, had gone radio silent. After Dad told her about the custody change, I hadn't heard a word from her. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was like she'd vanished from my life overnight. At first it stung. A part of me had hoped she'd fight harder, that she'd prove I mattered more than the money. But as the days turned into weeks, I started to accept that this was just who she was. She wasn't going to change. Dad noticed the shift in me too. One evening, while we were eating dinner, he said, "You seem lighter these days, Harper. Happier." I looked up from my plate, surprised. "Yeah, I guess I am. It's weird though. I thought I'd miss her more, you know?" He nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "It's okay to miss the idea of her, the mom you wanted her to be, but don't feel guilty for letting go of what she actually is. You deserve better. His words hit me hard. For so long I'd been holding on to this idea of Mom, hoping she'd wake up one day and realize how much she'd hurt me. But maybe it was time to stop waiting. Maybe it was time to let her go. As I settled into my new life, things started falling into place. I joined the school's debate team, which helped me find my footing socially and gave me something to focus on. My grades were improving, and I was finally starting to feel confident again. Dad and I even started talking about college, something I hadn't been able to think about before. For the first time, the future felt like something to look forward to, not something to fear. Then one evening, everything came full circle. I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from Mom. She was out with Rick and Liam celebrating Liam's birthday at a fancy restaurant. She looked happy, laughing with them, her arm draped around Rick's shoulder. I stared at the photo for a long time, a mix of emotions swirling in my chest. Anger, sadness, relief. It was clear where her priorities lay, and it wasn't with me. But instead of crying or throwing my phone across the room like I might have done a few months ago, I just sighed and put the phone down. I wasn't part of her picture anymore, and that was okay. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. Later that night, Ellie called me. "Harper, I just saw your mom's post. Are you okay?" "Yeah," I said, and to my surprise, I meant it. "I think I'm finally okay." Ella was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm proud of you, for standing up for yourself. I know it wasn't easy. Thanks," I said softly. "It wasn't, but I think it's what I needed." As I hung up the phone, I realized something. I was no longer carrying the weight of my mom's choices. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The weeks turned into months, and life slowly settled into something resembling normal. Living with Dad wasn't always easy. There were days when his long hours left me eating dinner alone or figuring out school stuff by myself. But the difference was, I knew he cared. When he was home, he was present. Even after a 12-hour workday, he'd ask about my classes, help me brainstorm for debate practice, or just hang out and watch bad reality TV with me. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like home. School was going well too. I'd fully settled in with my new group of friends, and I even had plans to go to Mia's birthday party that weekend. The debate team had become my favorite escape, a place where I could let my voice be heard without anyone dismissing me or telling me to handle things myself. It was empowering to feel like I mattered, like my thoughts and opinions carried weight. Ellie and I kept in touch almost every day. We FaceTimed, sent each other TikToks, and even planned for her to visit during spring break. She updated me on all the gossip back at my old school, mostly about Liam, who had officially earned the title of most hated guy in school. Apparently, he couldn't even walk down the hallway without someone whispering about his infamous cafeteria meltdown. Honestly, I almost feel bad for him, Ellie said during one of our calls. But then I remember what he did to you, and I'm like, nope, he deserves every second of it. I laughed, shaking my head. Yeah, karma really came through for me on that one. As for my mom, she stayed silent. After her initial barrage of texts and calls, she stopped reaching out entirely. I thought I'd feel sad or even guilty about that, but I didn't. Her silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. It confirmed what I'd suspected all along, that I'd never been her priority. Rick and Liam were her world and I was just extra. Someone she kept around because it was convenient or because it meant a steady stream of child support. Dad didn't talk about her much either. He was careful not to badmouth her in front of me, but I could tell he was still upset about everything she'd done. One night over dinner, he finally brought it up. You know, he said, setting his fork down. I've been thinking about how much you've had to go through these past few years, and I just want you to know none of this is your fault. Your mom's choices, they're on her, not you. I know, I said quietly. I think I finally stopped blaming myself. He nodded, his expression softening. Good, because you've always deserved better, Harper, and I'm glad you're here now. Me too, I said, smiling. I think this is where I was meant to be. As time went on, I started to let go of the anger I'd been carrying toward my mom. It wasn't easy. There were days when I'd see a photo of her on social media, smiling with Rick and Liam, and feel that familiar sting of betrayal. But each time the sting faded a little faster. She'd made her choices and now I was making mine. I didn't owe her my forgiveness, and I didn't owe her a place in my life. Spring break came faster than I expected, and having Ellie visit felt like a breath of fresh air. She loved my new friends and even managed to charm Dad, who teased her about how much junk food we'd gone through in just a few days. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt whole, like I was finally surrounded by people who cared about me for me, not for what I could give them or how I fit into their plans. Before Ellie left, we sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. She turned to me and said, "You're different now, you know? Happier, stronger. Yeah, I said, nodding. I feel it too, like I'm finally in control of my own life, she smiled. I'm proud of you, Harper, for everything. Her words stayed with me long after she left. For so long I'd felt trapped. By my mom, by Liam and Rick, by the idea that I had to keep everyone else happy at the expense of my own peace. But now I was free to choose my own path, to build the life I wanted, to surround myself with people who truly cared about me. Looking back, I don't regret the choices I made. Leaving my mom's house was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best thing I've ever done. It taught me to stand up for myself, to value my own happiness, and to let go of the people who don't deserve a place in my life. And as I sat in my room that night, scrolling through photos from Ellie's visit, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I was just ready for whatever came next, knowing I had the strength to handle it. Because for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. And that was enough. Story 2. After disowning me, my father somehow discovered me. What ought I to do? Since I don't want to worry about it too much, I'm using a throwaway account for this. I can elaborate a bit on what transpired and why it is so important to me. When I confronted my ex-girlfriend about her infidelity, she became extremely upset and told nearly everyone we knew that I had raped her in order to hide her infidelity. It seemed as though she attempted to ruin my life in order to keep herself safe. Because there was no proof, the police finally freed me after they had arrested me throughout the inquiry. But the harm had already been done. Most of my friends stopped interacting with me, and my parents had already shunned me. My parents thought I was a rapist who got away with it. Even though I hadn't been proven guilty, I had the impression that I was all alone. My dearest buddy was the only one who supported me. Knowing how terrible things were going for me, he secretly assisted me. However, I couldn't bear to be there, so I fled. I had no one to talk to and nothing to lose. I was not allowed to attend courses at my institution. I was only allowed to come in for tests and was only given work to complete via email. I made the decision to completely leave that place and work a few community jobs in an effort to save up enough cash for a modest apartment where I could reside and start again. I eventually came to the realization that I was sick of seeing my own name. It served as a constant reminder of all that had transpired. So I made the decision to alter it. That was a modest but significant step in the direction of forging a new identity and separating from my history. After that, I re-enrolled in university and acquired some new pals. I'm not sure why I did it in retrospect because it just left me bankrupt and deeply in debt. However, at the time, I believed that completing my degree may aid in my life's reconstruction. I persevered and eventually earned my teaching degree. After that, I made the decision to relocate to a distant nation on the opposite side of the globe. I obtained a job as a teacher there and found a wonderful apartment. It was refreshing to be in this new setting, and I adapted to my work, concentrating on my kids and attempting to figure out where I fit into this new existence. After a while, I met a girl who became my wife. Everything changed for me when I met her. At a time when I still felt a lot of the hurt from my past, she offered me love and care. After taking our time, we finally moved in together, and she supported me through all of the highs and lows. She became a rock for me, providing me with stability and a fresh feeling of optimism once we made the decision to be married. I didn't have complete faith in my wife when I first met her. I was so accustomed to being on guard that I would start to squirm when she got close or react if she even attempted to touch me. She gradually shone her patience and understanding though, and I finally fell deeply in love with her. She subsequently gave birth to our twins, a son and a girl. Those two are my favorites, and I will stop at nothing to protect them. Even though I was a foreigner, my wife's family greeted me with kindness and welcomed me right away. It brought back memories of the warmth and affection of a family. I'm now contentedly living with my wife and children in a lovely home, at least until yesterday night, when my wife and our daughter were out in the garden. I was playing with our son on her PlayStation. Suddenly, my father knocks on the door and answers. I was too surprised for him to talk to me. I frightened my son by slamming the door. I phoned my wife to bring our daughter inside after I had taken him to his room. Like me, she was shaken. When my father continued to knock, I suddenly started crying. When my wife questioned who he was, she consoled me before opening the door herself. He claimed to be my dad. Despite knowing very little about my history, my wife was incredibly sad for me. She became enraged and started screaming at my father for leaving me. I begged her to let him in after she had calmed down, but to keep our children occupied in their room while I spoke with him. He claimed to have discovered texts between my ex-girlfriend and the man she was cheating on me with while assisting her in cleaning up some of the data on her phone. They were feeling bad about destroying my life and wishing she could go back in time. I was shocked to hear my father say that. All of the rage, perplexity, and grief I had been onto for so long returned. Despite our strained relationship, I wanted to trust him. As my wife entertained the children, I listened, trying to take in what he had to say. At least my father's remarks brought some closure to a chapter that had been left tragically unfinished, but I realized I still had a lot to think about. When my father learned the truth, he refrained from confronting my ex-girlfriend directly because he didn't want to generate any more stress. Rather, to show me that he believed me, he quietly started looking for me. Since he's here and I need assistance determining what to do next, I don't care how he discovered me. I've given it some thought while attempting to declutter my mind by strolling along some random streets and weighing my alternatives. Turning him away and telling him to leave me alone and return to her country is one method. Another is to make amends with him and perhaps even inform my mother. To be honest though, I'm not sure what the best course of action is. I intend to take tomorrow off work to deal with my extreme stress. Since my father lives in a neighboring apartment, I'll most likely give him my response. I'm not sure I can ever trust any of them again, but I have to go with my gut on this one. Let S read the comments first, then the update. He claimed that by deleting some items from my ex-girlfriend's phone, he was helping her. Do you think this is strange? First, why would he continue to communicate with her? Secondly, why would he pry into her phone? People are only attempting to assist. Refrain from breaking into phones. This is a warning sign. The man who rejected you continues to communicate with the woman who destroyed your life. I somehow chased you halfway around the world after discovering the truth by being a nosy. Are you prepared to let your family suffer from this chaos? You're correct. It doesn't add up much. I detest being in this predicament, and it's such a nasty scenario. I quote am having trouble answering all of his questions and coming up with the correct phrases. Oh, darling, hearing that those who make unfounded accusations ought to face legal action and jail time was really cruel. People's lives are ruined. This was really absurd. Keeping him out of your life is the greatest advice I can provide. He was eager to leave you without even giving you enough time to work things out. Furthermore, you're content with your life without them already. You may forgive whomever you want, of course, but I'm curious as to why he's making an effort to make amends. I wish you well, my love. I appreciate you sharing your tale. Thank you. I want to take the eye for eye approach and just keep him away from my family. In hindsight, I'm not the most forgiving person. He must deal with the fallout from his deeds. Let's go to the updates. Hello, everyone. I apologize for the long lapse in communication, but I have ultimately made the decision to not make amends with my father. I just lack the capacity to forgive him. Maybe some of you want to know what occurred. Here is the tale. I went to my father's hotel room after my previous post and informed him that I would not make amends or do anything similar. Even though he was crying, he understood. He clarified that he had cut my ex-girlfriend off from the family entirely and told my mother the truth. Many of you were wondering why there was communication with my ex in the first place, so I inquired. She felt too guilty to let go of the family completely, he claimed. That's sufficient closure for me, but I'm not inclined to believe it. My father didn't give my mother my phone number, but it seems that she didn't take the news well and sought to get it. Knowing what to believe is difficult. Since they put me out on the streets like I was a rabid dog, it may all be a ruse to bring me back into their life. I quote am still nauseous from it. I told my kid it was a coworker when he questioned who was at the door that evening. When my children are older, or if they experience difficult times themselves, I will explain so they know I understand. Now everyone is doing well. I hope my father honors his promise and protects my privacy, even if the entire situation shocked me. If there are any changes, I will update you. However, I believe that this chapter is now concluded. I sincerely appreciate all of your encouragement and good remarks. If you know someone who has had comparable circumstances to myself, support them. Don't ever dump them on the street. My children will always have my support, ensuring their happiness, even if it requires relocating across the globe. The last update. Prior to my father discovering me and expelling me, I was leading a tranquil life, which set the stage for this essay. My family and I just had an argument where they broke a commitment, which really infuriated me. And after giving it some serious thought, I made the decision to confront them head on. I returned home via plane and met with my brother, mother, father, and even the girl who had accused me. Naturally, I was anxious, but I was quite aback to discover that I didn't truly consider them family. Naturally, I recognized them, but I didn't see them the same way I do my wife, children, and in-laws. My mother began by sobbing and attempting to express regret. It simply repulsed me. My brother was the one who maintained his cool and struck up a conversation as my father consoled my mother. I told him to stop chit-chatting and that this meeting was on my terms. When he inquired about how I was feeling, I explained to them all that I just needed closure and wasn't interested in making amends. I was careful to warn them that if they tried to follow me, I would contact the police. I questioned my parents about why they left me so quickly. Notwithstanding the police's claim that there was no evidence, they said that seeing me in detention shattered their hearts and that they took a snap choice. Since they made no effort to defend me or anything, I called them out on it. I then inquired about the opinions of various individuals regarding my father, searching through my accuser's phone in my initial post. He said that when she asked him to remove non-essential employees from her phone, he discovered the conversation logs she had sent with her pals. Even if work wasn't rewarding, I tolerated it because my dad was always proficient with technology. Then I questioned my brother about why he had never gotten back to me. He claimed to do so with a startled expression, but I consistently disregarded him. As it happens, he was correct. My brother had reached out to me hundreds of times, offering money to help me get out of my current predicament. He asked why I never responded, assuming that I detested him as a result of what had transpired. As it turns out, my mother was unable to get assistance when I was totally confused because she had banned my contacts on all of her phone plans because she was paying for my brother's previous phone plan. My ex was the icing on the cake. I started by asking her why she did it. She said that she was afraid of what may occur and that she loved me unconditionally. Yes, exactly. Correct. That's a humorous way to express things. She claimed that because she knew it was all a lie, each therapy session made her feel even more terrible. After that, she informed me that she had not dated anybody since, and that she hoped I would return so she could say I was sorry, which would allegedly turn back time and make everything right. Oh my God. Even that was nonsense because my father claimed to have discovered the chat logs of 3 separate partners she had while I was abroad. My ex sought to grasp my hand while sobbing. It was really bold of her to want another opportunity. This only made me resentful, so I took out my phone and started showing them all hundreds of photos of my 2 kids' happy moments and life milestones. My family and I visited cities together. It was their first day of classes. They were both in my wife's arms. I informed her that if she hadn't been so foolish, she might have gotten this. What about my parents? What they lost out on because they didn't even listen to me? I briefly believed I had gone too far, but then I remembered that it was nothing in comparison to what they had done to me. However, I got to see my old best buddy and his family, so it wasn't all bad. Even though it seemed like everything was against me, I was still thankful that they took me in, and they were glad to see me. I intend to go back to the country eventually to show my children the origins of half of their culture. However, I will not allow them to be around my family. My wife, her family, and my children are the sole members of my family in my opinion. It went rather nicely in my opinion. As several of you requested, edit. I've made the decision to let my brother see his nephew and niece via plane. In the post, I totally failed to bring this up. Sorry. I was first hesitant since my brother and I didn't get along well when we were kids. Rivalries between brothers and all that. In the second story, my pal falsely claimed that my boyfriend and I were having an affair. My boyfriend doesn't think I'm real. Let me begin by stating that I'm well aware of how complex and difficult this scenario is. It still shocks me that my lover doesn't trust me, but I can understand why he would be angry and perhaps suspicious. After all that's transpired, I suppose it seems natural that he would be distrustful. Still, it's difficult. Paul and I have been together for 3 years. I truly adore him, and we've shared many wonderful moments together. However, he struggled with trust when we initially started dating. You see, he was somewhat traumatized by previous relationships in which he was cheated on. I wanted to reassure him that I would never do anything to damage him since I knew he was going through a lot because of those previous experiences. I made it extremely apparent right away that I had never cheated on anyone and never would. I also informed him that I tried my best to make him feel safe with me and that I understood why he had trust difficulties because of his history. However, I also made it clear that I would not be with someone who couldn't trust me. Someone who is always suspicious or watching me closely bothers me in a relationship. It was somewhat difficult in the beginning. He had a lot of trouble trusting others, but eventually he improved. I made care to be completely honest with him, and I believe my behavior was self-evident. I had never cheated on him, always told him about my life, and always been honest with him. I believed I had gained his trust as a result. During the course of our 3 years of dating, however, twice during our relationship, he had moments of insecurity. He wanted to listen in on my talks with my male pals. Both times I gave in because I could sense he was anxious. Not because he truly believed I was cheating, but because I understood his suspicions sprang from insecurity. I tried to allay his worries. On the second occasion, however, I expressed my displeasure at being treated as though I was involved in some sort of dubious activity. I had the impression that he didn't trust me and believed that I wasn't worthy of having my friend's privacy. Even though I was aware of his background, it was unfair. I informed him that I would be more than happy to sit down and talk about it if he didn't trust me because of something I had said or done, so that we may resolve any problems together. However, I also made it apparent that I anticipated his faith, provided I had done nothing to raise his suspicions. A partnership simply cannot work without trust, which is a two-way street. Paul appeared to understand after hearing what I had to say. He apologized for giving me the impression that he didn't trust me and acknowledged that I hadn't done anything wrong. He pledged to refrain from asking again until there was a legitimate cause for worry. And that problem hasn't resurfaced since then. But in terms of trust, it seems like we're still a long way off despite everything. Even if he has improved, I can't help but feel that he isn't telling me all about the distrust that still lurks in the back of his mind. It's difficult because I want to think that we're doing well, but occasionally I get subtle clues that he's still harboring some of that old insecurity. Paul was interested in a chat I had with my friend Roger. Now, 2 years before I ever began seeing Paul, Roger admitted that he was in love with me. At the time, I informed him that I had no interest in him in that way, and that was it. I had no reason to believe that Roger and I were anything other than amicable by the time I started dating Paul. We would occasionally cross paths as pals. Roger and I made the decision to get coffee a week ago. To be honest, I never in a million years imagined that Roger had harbored sentiments for me at the cafe prior to our meeting. As usual, we were simply conversing when Roger abruptly and dramatically started talking about how much he still loved me and how awful Paul was as a partner. He advised me to end my relationship with Paul and start dating him. He kept talking about how devoted he was to me and how ideal our relationship would be. Since I was completely taken aback when he eventually stopped talking, I just sat there in silence while he continued to talk. Even though I was honestly shocked and really uneasy. I was astonished and perplexed that I loved Paul, and that I couldn't possibly leave him, so I probably didn't tell him as forcefully as I should have. I informed Roger that I had to get home immediately. The entire experience left me feeling disturbed, so I took some time to collect myself before leaving for home. Upon arriving home, I was appalled to discover that Roger had sent Paul this lengthy, utterly crazy Facebook message. He expressed his love for me and his belief that we were destined to be together. He didn't say it directly, but he strongly suggested that we had been having an affair for weeks. I had no idea why he did this or what was going through his mind, and it was a complete disaster. When Paul saw the message, he fully believed it. He simply believed I was lying, despite my attempts to explain everything. He no longer wanted to speak to me or even see me. He informed me that we were no longer together, that he would trust Roger's Facebook message above what I had to say. Broke my heart. I was shocked that our relationship was coming to an end in this manner. Furthermore, I feel ashamed since I will now be perceived as a cheater by others, someone who had betrayed Paul. Roger's actions have infuriated me. A week has passed after this whole incident, and despite my best efforts, Paul is refusing to engage in conversation. He refuses to hear anything I say. Although I am aware that he has previously struggled with trust, I believed that we had moved past it a long time ago. How should I proceed? More data from OPI. I absolutely heard you when you said that you can't remain friends with someone once they tell you they love you. Just to be clear though, I never thought emotions would vanish on their own. 5 years ago, Roger declared his love for me. After he declared his love for me, we were separated for about a year. However, we were reunited by mutual friends and were friends for another year prior to my relationship with Paul. He behaved completely platonically toward me over that year, so I suppose I assumed he had had enough time to move on from his sentiments. For the 3 years that I've been with Paul, he has also been completely platonic. You were correct that I should have broken up with him, and I was obviously mistaken, but I didn't expect the feelings would simply go away. I believed they had disappeared during the year we didn't communicate much. Paul, meanwhile, has previously heard the entire narrative, including Roger's remarks from 5 years ago. I quote, "am lying," he believes. But should I still bring up the matter with Paul and attempt to get him to speak to me when I explain that Roger and I are no longer in contact? He's already heard it all. He simply won't trust me. I'm sorry to hear that. It's a difficult circumstance. The update is now available. Update. I want to express my gratitude to everyone who left a remark before I shared the events. Just a few things that I missed in the original post that I wanted to touch on. First, Paul was aware that Roger and I were having coffee. It was not a secret of any sort. Paul's buddies are women. He has coffee or lunch by himself. In our relationship, this is thus not unusual. Second, Roger had declared his love for me 5 years prior, but Paul was unaware of this. It was a mistake on my part not to tell him that, but really, that was a very long time ago, and that was old history to my blatantly incorrect knowledge. There wasn't really a natural moment when it would have come up because we didn't talk about her background in great detail, and I just never thought to say anything. And lastly, I didn't have a close friendship with Roger. We weren't great friends or messaging all the time. We didn't talk at random, but we would occasionally hang together and would stay in contact if anything important came up. Having said that, I followed several Redditors' advice and sent a Facebook message after I felt a bit more at ease. He was questioned why he lied by Roger. He answered, "What do you mean?" I then began to push him more firmly. To be honest, he didn't answer the majority of my messages at all and just sent one-word responses. I lied for a variety of reasons, regardless of how many times I requested and never really answered yes. In a last remark, I informed him that although I was really wounded and furious and that I had never had an affair with him, our relationship was ended and he was never to get in touch with me again. "All right," he said, and that was all. I tried to clear my name in my message, but I didn't believe it would help rescue us, so I forwarded Paul the complete Facebook exchange. I questioned him about whether he thought Roger's responses to my inquiries and my own to Roger were consistent with what he would anticipate if Roger's charges were accurate. Paul phoned me the following day after failing to reply that day. Paul essentially stated that he believed me more and more the more he about it, that Roger's answers didn't make sense, and that he now believed nothing had happened as a result of our chat. Nevertheless, he claimed that he was unable to be with me since our trust had been betrayed. He essentially stopped participating in the conversation when I became very irate and shouted at him, wondering why I was being punished for nothing. I realized that wasn't my best moment, but I was just so frustrated. He is dropping off the things I left at his place later this week, and we did ultimately conclude the talk amicably, if not peacefully. I've learnt my lesson. Not only will a friend's expression of interest keep us friends forever, but I will never date someone who has a history of cheating or who lacks trust. I know I seem a little resentful, but in all honesty, I don't think my honesty and faithfulness throughout those 3 years were worth anything. Paul and I ended up devastated and alone after I was treated like a cheater, regardless of whether I cheated or not. Despite being completely loyal, staying with a WBY or ending up alone is preferable to spending 3 more years in a relationship. To get at this conclusion. Story 3, and my entire day for being honest with my friends when I told them that I wouldn't be going on a weekend getaway because I didn't want to spend 3 days discussing marriage and having children. I am a 27-year-old woman with 8 female pals. Since school, we have been friends for more than 10 years. We no longer reside in the same location. We get together for a weekend stay at an Airbnb a few times a year. Good food, beverages, a hot tub, etc. Used to be a part of this weekend. Right now I'm happy with my life. I'm not sure if I would want children, but if I did, I wouldn't want a single sin. I'm single and dating. 5 or 6 of my pals are married or in committed relationships. Are these 5 expecting a child, or are they already pregnant? This year, I'll be seeing all of my pals at different friend birthday celebrations and weddings. I've received an invitation to the girls' vacation this year. I've stated that I can't attend. When my pregnant buddy questioned me face to face, I initially gave no explanation. I was honest with her. It's a huge expensive outlay for 3 days when we mainly discuss people's impending engagements, weddings, and babies. Therefore, I'm not attending. Despite my busy schedule, I feel that many of my friends are uninterested in me, unless I mention the person I'm seeing. I also listened to one of my friends about her plans to nurse with fury the final time. For more than an hour. She's not trying or pregnant. To be honest, it's dull and condescending. It's also a really costly method for me to feel self-conscious. I told my buddy that while I'm happy that they're still living the life they desire, perhaps this isn't the weekend for me right now. At other words, the group seems to be at two different stages of existence. It concentrates on a single stage, and I'm in the minority. Since then, my buddy has told me how upset she is and that I'm not happy for her or her pals. I replied that I didn't think the trip was for me, but it was clear that I was from other acts. It's difficult for me to fit this into my schedule and budget because I have a lot of other commitments. For one friend in particular, I would like to emphasize that throughout the past 2 years, I have flown to attend her baby shower and spent 3 weekends away for her wedding. She hasn't wanted to fly to visit me, and I haven't asked her, within the previous 2 years. So I want to know whether I'm the a-hole for telling the truth about why I can't go. I probably would have just stated, I don't have the time to go and it's too expensive, and stopped there. However, you're not the a-hole, in my opinion. Story 3. My girlfriend said that I might be replaced, but she subsequently pleaded with me to take her back since she didn't want me as much as she believed. Sarah and I have been dating for the past 2 years. As far as I was concerned, everything was going rather well. About a year ago, we moved in together, and to be honest, it seemed like the next logical step. At this time, I thought we were developing a strong relationship. I'm 28 and she's 26. I've been paying the most of the bills because she's still in school and doesn't have a full-time job. At first, I wasn't bothered by it. In any case, I was the owner of the property, and I felt like I was supporting her at a difficult period. Being supportive, you know. I considered ourselves a group. And everything evened out once she earned her degree. Not a huge thing, is it? However, things have seemed strange recently. Sarah has been spending more and more time with her pals. Furthermore, I'm not referring to once a week or anything informal. It is similar to every other evening. She no longer invites me. She also becomes quite defensive when I inquire about her activities. As if I were making some sort of accusation. She claims that I shouldn't be so attached to her and that she needs space. Clinging? These days, I hardly ever see her. When I return home from work, she is usually either already out or getting ready to go. She doesn't seem to be there at all. She's either aloof or hooked to her phone. I initially persuaded myself that I was overanalyzing the situation. I mean, who doesn't need their own time to spend with friends? That was not a man I wanted to be, the domineering partner who puts himself first. I so moved aside to give her the room she desired. However, nothing changed even after I did. We were simply sitting around talking about very ordinary things a few nights ago. That quote is how it began anyhow. She simply casually interrupts us while we are discussing loyalty and relationships. You're quite interchangeable, you know. What? For a moment I sort of froze. Did she really just say that, for example? She continued chatting as if it were no big issue, but I honestly believed I must have misheard her, or that she was kidding, so I laughed uncomfortably. Claiming that many men would be interested in dating me. I was unsure of how to respond. She's behaving like it's the most natural thing in the world, and I was sitting there trying to take in what she just said. She started to backtrack as soon as I asked her what she meant by it. It's only a joke. Don't take it so seriously, she said. Here, quote, S the problem though. She wasn't kidding. You can tell when someone is making fun of you or teasing you by the way their voice changes. Yes, none of that existed. She sounded earnest. She wouldn't have even attempted to retract her behavior if I had done differently. It felt awkward the remainder of the night. I kept thinking about what she had said. She kept asking me whether I was angry, so I suppose she noticed. I simply went to bed after telling her I was exhausted. I woke up early the following morning, still feeling strange about it. Who would say such a thing to their boyfriend? Particularly when there was no argument between us at all. She seemed to be intentionally trying to undermine my confidence, as if it were a power move or something. I'm now unable to stop questioning anything in my own mind. Does she really want to be in this relationship if she's saying things like this? What if she doesn't? Why not simply say it? Why engage in gaming? I've tried again to relive the incident, thinking that perhaps I misinterpreted it or misunderstood it, but the more I think about it, the worse it seems. It's more than simply the remark. It quote s all of the preparation, the strange atmosphere at home, the defensiveness, and the late nights out. She seems to be halfway out the door but lacks the courage to stop it. I'm now pondering whether I ought to be the one to cut the connection. I can't get rid of the sensation that this is a serious red sign, but I also think that I'm overreacting. If she doesn't think I'm valuable or worth dating, what's the point? Although I've been in unhappy relationships in the past, this one feels different. It's not the typical arguments or clashes. She seems more interested in pushing me away or testing me, and I'm not sure if I want to stay to see how far she will go. In any case, I'm simply attempting to determine what to do next. Should I ignore it and wait to see if things improve? Or am I insane for making this such a huge deal? Sincerely, I'm at a loss, and I'd appreciate hearing your opinions. The things Sarah said kept coming to mind. I couldn't get your replacement stuff out of my brain. Every time I glanced at her, it was in the back of my mind, even though I tried to ignore it, thinking perhaps I was exaggerating it. I came to the realization that I couldn't overlook it after a few days. I had to confront it and find out what was actually happening. I told her we needed to chat one evening. I took a seat next to her as she was on the sofa, as usual, browsing through her phone. I remained composed and just informed her that I had been considering what she had said and that it disturbed me. She hardly raised her head. "What are you discussing?" She spoke as if she didn't understand what I was talking about. I mentioned that I was interchangeable. It didn't seem lighthearted. I've been bothered by it ever since. Her entire aura changed at that point. She put down her phone and rolled her eyes. "Are you still on that, really?" "It was only a remark. You're exaggerating." I explained to her that I wasn't attempting to cause a fight, but I needed to know why she would say that. Was that something she stated at random without giving it much thought, or did she truly feel that way? She groaned and became defensive rather than respond. "You're so sensitive, my God." By that I meant nothing. "You're exaggerating this situation." I could already feel my frustration building at this moment. I stated that I wasn't attempting to exaggerate the situation. But why are we together at all, if you truly believe that I can be replaced? Tell me where you're thinking, because I don't feel comfortable doing this. At that point, she struck me with it. She honestly answered, "Yeah, I've thought about it," while crossing her arms and giving me a direct look. "There are better men in the world. But I adore you, which is why I'm with you. That ought to be sufficient." As I tried to take in what she had just said, I just gazed at her. There are better men out there. As if I were the consolation prize or something. She was essentially telling me that she was settling for me. I remained silent for a minute, attempting to think of a way to react without losing my temper. Finally, I remarked, "Let me get this straight. You believe that you're settling for me, but since you love me, I should accept that. What do you mean by that?" She gave a shrug. "Yes, I suppose. Look, I'm just being honest. I didn't want to offend you." That's when I finally understood. It wasn't a poor joke or a one-time remark. It was her true feelings. She didn't respect our relationship or me. I knew I couldn't continue in this manner. "We're probably done," I said, trying to speak as steadily as possible. Her eyes opened as if she had just heard something she couldn't believe. "Hold on, what? Is this the reason you're ending our relationship?" "Yes," I said. "Go locate one of those better men if you believe I can be replaced. You were discussing. If I don't feel appreciated in a relationship, I won't remain." That's when the shouting began. She insulted me in every way she could, calling me ungrateful, theatrical, and selfish. She even attempted to turn the tables on me by accusing me of discarding her. I didn't participate after everything we'd gone through. "She needs to get out," I informed her. As she concentrated on her studies, I reminded her that this was my home and that I had been covering all expenses. I refused to back down when she attempted to claim that she had nowhere to go. I gave her till the end of the week to gather her belongings and depart. She broke down in tears at one point, expressing her shock at what I was doing to her. It didn't feel real though, even then. She seemed to be more distressed about losing her safety net than she was about losing me. It was a stressful rest of the night. She avoided me as much as she could, slammed doors, and murmured things under her breath. She remained in the living room, and I remained in the bedroom, and by the next morning, she had already started packing. It wasn't simple. A part of me felt bad, like if I was being too harsh or overreacting. The other side of myself, however, recognized that I was acting morally. For the time being, I couldn't continue to be in a relationship where I was viewed as adequate. She was gone before the end of the week. Instead of feeling relieved, as if a burden had been removed, I simply felt numb. I was unsure of what would happen next, but I was certain of one thing. I refused to accept someone who believed I could be replaced. I thought things were finally calming down once Sarah moved away. I was beginning to feel like I could breathe again after the nasty split. I'd stopped questioning myself. I thought I had made the proper decision in severing my relationship with someone who didn't appreciate me. A few days later, I received a message that caught me off guard. I was contacted by one of Sarah's friends, whom I had seen at a few gatherings but didn't know very well. I initially assumed it would be another guilt trip, urging me to reevaluate the split or whatever, but it was actually far worse. She began by stating that she believed I should know the truth and wasn't trying to stir things up. She informed me that Sarah had been secretly dating someone else for some months. She said that while she was still living in my home, Sarah had been secretly seeing the man, whom she had met via her acquaintances. I wasn't sure how to react at first. As she continued to speak, many things began to make sense, even if I didn't want to accept it at first. The defensiveness, the late nights, and the way she had suddenly begun to act as though being with me was a favor. The buddy went so far as to say that Sarah went to this guy expecting to move in with him, and get this, after the breakup. He left her. He apparently didn't want anything to do with her after learning that she had been living with me for free and depending on my money while he was with me. Everything clicked. I couldn't tell if my failure to notice it sooner made me feel foolish, furious, or deceived. However, it was obvious that I had to face Sarah. I invited her to meet up in a message. I had no intention of screaming or creating a commotion. All I wanted to do was listen to her version of events. The next day, we met at a coffee shop after she gave her consent. She pretended that nothing was wrong when she entered. She even grinned as though they were catching up casually. Without wasting any time, I got right to the point. I am aware of the other man, I said. Her smile vanished in an instant. What are you discussing? Her tone was unconfident as she requested. She was aware already. I told your friend everything I said. For what duration has it been occurring? She first made an effort to refute it. I have no idea what you're discussing. She stated there was no one else. She refused to look me in the eye though. I took out my phone and showed her the screenshots that I had received from her buddy. Are you implying that this is all a fabrication? I inquired. At that point, she lost it. She began to stutter as she attempted to clarify. All okay? All right. Yes, she replied. It wasn't serious, but I was seeing someone. I didn't intend to do you harm. What I was hearing was unbelievable. You didn't intend to do me harm, I said. While you were living in my home and allowing me to cover all of the expenses, you were secretly seeing someone else. Right now, can you even hear yourself? She attempted to defend it by claiming that she didn't know how to talk to me about it and that she felt ignored because I was constantly preoccupied with work. She claimed that the other person gave her a sense of importance and desire. And then I was finished. She might spin it any way she pleased, I informed her, but it didn't change the fact that she had been deceiving and taking advantage of me. I stood up, told her I would never see or speak to her again, and left. After addressing her, I would want to say that I felt some sort of relief or closure, but in reality I simply felt exhausted. It seemed as though all of my months-long suspicions had finally been verified. However, I felt empty rather than justified. I removed her from social media and banned her number as soon as I came home. I didn't want to give her the opportunity to try to re-enter my life by any means possible. The indications were all there, looking back. I just trusted her, therefore I didn't want to see them. However, I've learned better. If someone reveals themselves to you, trust them the first time. I'm now there. All I'm trying to do is get over this and move on. At least I'm not locked in a relationship with someone who didn't appreciate me, even if I know it will take some time. There must be some significance to that. It was quiet for a bit after I hoped she had received the message and was on her way, but that was obviously wishful thinking. After a week, she began unexpectedly visiting my home. She knocked on the door the first time and pretended that we were still friendly. She tried to grin as she said, "Hey, can we have a conversation?" "No," I said, keeping the door largely shut. "We've already spoken. Nothing else can be said." I didn't let the fact that she appeared hurt affect me. She went on to say that she was sorry, that she didn't want to offend me, and that she was simply perplexed. I promptly shut it down. I don't want excuses, I said. We're finished. Sarah, you must go. I refused to listen to her argument. If she didn't go, I threatened to contact the police. She marched off, huffing. However, I was aware that I would see her again. As it turned out, she wasn't alone herself when she returned. She was accompanied by a couple of her boisterous pals. As soon as they exited the vehicle, they began shouting at me through the door, accusing me of overreacting and calling me a jerk for kicking her out. I barely opened the door to let myself in. Sarah and I are the only ones involved. I spoke aggressively. You quote, "We're not supposed to be here. I'll call the cops if you stay." I closed the door in their faces when one of them attempted to argue that I was being unreasonable. After shouting for a few minutes, they eventually left. The story didn't end there. Sarah began attempting to contact me through common connections. People I hadn't spoken to in months sent me messages inquiring as to whether I had indeed expelled her without cause. She was fabricating a tale to paint herself as the victim, claiming that I had overreacted and abruptly left her. It upset me at first. I detested the thought of anyone falling for her falsehoods, but then I came to a realization. Those who truly know me wouldn't fall for her bullshit. Like me, they would see right through her narrative. I still wanted to be sure I was safe. I began recording everything, mails, texts, or anything else that revealed the truth. I refused to allow her to continue to misrepresent the facts. Her attempt to coerce me into speaking with her by using one of my closest friends was the last straw. One evening, this friend, let's call him Jake, came over and informed me that Sarah had been contacting him constantly. She was asking if she could speak with him on my behalf. I can't get him to listen. Jake, who is a strong man, didn't appreciate it when she tried to make it seem like she was worried about me. "Look," he continued, "Guy, just sharing what she has been saying with you. I told her to get away, but you might want to watch." I made the decision that enough was enough at that point. To make sure she had no legal claim to anything in the house or the life we had created together, I contacted a lawyer. By the conclusion of that week, I wanted all ties broken. I thought I had taken back control of my life at last. Although it wasn't simple, I knew I had made the correct choice. The only way to proceed was to sever all connections. I began to feel a feeling of relaxation, despite the fact that the entire scenario had been chaotic. I had stopped watching over my shoulder for the next dramatic moment. At last, I could begin to concentrate on myself and determine my next course of action. I made it obvious that there was no turning back, even if Sarah might have believed she could worm her way back into my life. I was finished, and I had no intention of turning back. I believed that the drama was finally over after all that transpired. I ordered Sarah to leave me alone for a time, changed the locks, and blocked her everywhere. She appeared to be moving on, and my only concern was reorganizing my life. However, it seems like karma had different ideas for her. A mutual buddy sent the first message. Chris, let's call him. He avoided becoming entangled in other people's problems. I knew it wouldn't work out when he reached out. He informed me that Sarah was essentially evicting herself from the house and informing everyone we knew that I was dominating. I was first irritated. I wasn't surprised that she was attempting to portray herself as the victim, but it still infuriated me. However, Chris assured me that most people weren't believing her narrative, so I shouldn't worry about it. Her version of events wasn't really sticking, and it seemed like she had recently ruined a number of relationships. Then the true blow was dropped by Chris. As it happens, Sarah had been skulking around with this guy. She mistakenly believed that he was Prince Charming. He left her when she attempted to move in with him after I evicted her. The reason he discovered she had been utilizing my money to live with me for free. Chris claims that the man cut her off entirely after calling her out for being a gold seeker. The story didn't end there. None of Sarah's close friends were interested in taking her in, so she had been looking for a new home to live. Because Sarah wasn't doing her share, the one buddy she had been staying with became irritated. She was always whining about how unfair life was, not helping out around the house and not paying for food. The companion eventually ejected her as well. With whoever would take her in, she was couch surfing now. Chris said that she had even gotten in touch with some old pals she hadn't spoken to in a long time, attempting to use guilt to get them to allow her to stay. The majority of them either said no outright or ignored her. But hold on, things will improve. While still enrolled in school, Sarah's grades seemed to have plummeted. She was in risk of failing several of her classes since she had been skipping them while she was skulking around with the other guy. Additionally, she attempted to apply for internships in her profession but received no response. No one wanted to risk her since word had spread about her drama and flakiness. I'll confess that I experienced a strange range of feelings after hearing all of this. I had sympathy for her. I couldn't help but think, well, what did you expect? Even though it was obvious that she had dug herself into a hole, she had to face with the consequences of her decisions. Then one day she sent me an email. Yes, she managed to get in touch with me despite my repeated attempts to block and shut her off. The lengthy email was filled with excuses and apologies. She acknowledged that she had made a grave error by taking me for granted. She pleaded with me to change my mind and give her another opportunity, promising to go to any lengths to make things right. I didn't even think to answer. Nothing else could be said. She threw away all the opportunities I had given her to be honest and make amends while we were still together. Just because things weren't going her way anymore didn't mean I was going to allow her back into my life. It's funny because I caught up to her without having to do anything for karma. She had to cope with the fallout after making her own mess. I would be lying if I claimed that it didn't feel like some kind of justice to me, even though I don't enjoy seeing other people suffer. The situation has been improving. I have been concentrating on my work, increasing the amount of time I spend with friends, and even taking up certain pastimes that I had neglected while in a relationship. Being in charge of my life once more feels wonderful. Regarding Sarah, I have no idea what she's doing at the moment, and to be honest, I don't give a damn. She's resting in her bed, which she made. I sincerely hope she took something away from this, as I certainly did. If this entire experience has taught me anything, it's that you cannot allow others to treat you like a choice. When someone shows you they don't regard you, you should respect yourself enough to leave. It's difficult, but ultimately worthwhile. A few months after I stopped seeing Sarah altogether, unexpected things began to come together for me. It resembled a cascade of fortunate events. In the meantime, mutual acquaintances informed me that Sarah's life was still in disarray. To be honest, I couldn't have done a better job of planning it. The first job came in. I received a promotion offer that included more flexible scheduling and a sizable pay increase. Without Sarah's antics and ongoing tension, the time was ideal. With the additional money, it was evident that my increased effort at work had paid off. I got to work on some long overdue improvements to my home, like new paint, new furniture, and upgraded appliances. It all seemed like a new beginning. The greatest thing, though, after years of fantasizing about it, I finally had time to take the journey. I organized a 2-week trip with a friend of mine, Matt, to a destination we had always discussed. While I was prospering, Sarah's life was still falling apart, and that was just what I needed to start over and concentrate on myself. Do you recall her couch surfing days? She also burnt her bridges there, it turns out. Sarah was freeloading and unwilling to contribute to anything, according to a social media tirade from one of her pals. It didn't take a genius to figure out who they were referring to, even if the message didn't specifically name her. People continued bringing up her actions, even though I tried not to focus too much on them. It seemed that no one wanted to interact with her anymore, thus she was having trouble finding a place to live. Even those who had been close to her began to distance themselves from her as her reputation as a user grew. The real kicker came next. At last, Sarah's school caught up with her. She had to repeat several of her classes and pay for them out of pocket because she failed a few of them. Even while it might not seem like much, it was a significant blow because she was unemployed and had alienated almost everyone who could have helped her. My life continued to improve in the interim. I resumed dating after the holiday. It was fantastic to meet new people and put myself out there, but nothing too serious. I went on a couple dates with a woman named Emily who was the total opposite of Sarah. Despite the fact that our relationship did not work out, she was a lovely, grounded person who had her life together. It served as a reminder that there are many wonderful individuals in the world who genuinely understand how to treat others with dignity. A common buddy who had been silent during all the commotion then came out to me, giving me yet another surprise. We'll refer to her as Lisa. Lisa stated that she wanted to correct the record after hearing what Sarah had been saying about me. According to her, Sarah had been disparaging me to anybody who would listen, but her tale was no longer credible. Since they had witnessed her behavior firsthand, the majority of people were really supporting me. Here's the actual twist, though. Lisa also informed me that Sarah had made another attempt to get in touch with the man she had cheated on me with. Yes, the same man who left her following our split. She apparently believed she might persuade him to try her again, but he refused to listen. He cut her off right away and even informed their common acquaintances that she was too dramatic for them to handle. I couldn't help but feel a bit content at this moment. It was obvious that her activities were catching up with her, even though I wasn't actively trying to make her life miserable. The only one she could blame was herself. For my part, I was doing well. I'd started taking up activities I'd put off, and I'd gotten back in contact with some old acquaintances I'd lost touch with while dating Sarah. Even though I had wanted to do sports for years, but had never had the opportunity, I finally joined a local league. A few weeks ago, the cherry on top was added. I was brought aside by my manager, who informed me that I was being considered for a senior position inside the organization. Even though it was still early, it was incredible to hear that they thought I had promise. Leaving Sarah behind was one of the smartest choices I'd ever made, and it served as a reminder that I was headed in the right direction. Although I would want to claim that I didn't think about Sarah at all throughout this period, her name would occasionally come up in discussions or on social media. Now, the difference was that I wasn't bothered by it. I no longer felt wounded or furious. Simply put, I was glad she wasn't an issue for me. In retrospect, the way things transpired almost seems humorous. Sarah believed she could handle me as though I were interchangeable. However, it was she who ultimately found herself alone. Bridges are burning on both sides. In the meantime, I was creating a life of which I was very proud. This isn't usually how karma works, but when it does, it's impressive. Furthermore, I wouldn't wish somebody bad luck. It's difficult not to believe that this was how the cosmos balanced things out. Although I wouldn't describe my life as ideal right now, it is unquestionably moving in the right direction. What's the best part? I am aware that no one pulled me down. I got here on my own. I don't know what a win is if that isn't it. Once again, I want to thank Reddit for giving me clarity when I needed it most. Let us go on and put all of the turmoil behind us.